Little May sat on the wooden bench, her legs dangling several inches above the floor. At 8 years old, she was so small that her feet couldn't touch the ground when she sat at the piano. But that never stopped her. It had never stopped her since she was 3. The backstage area of the National Youth Music Competition was buzzing with nervous energy. Teenagers paced back and forth, their fingers moving through invisible scales in the air. Some hummed quietly to themselves. Others sat with their eyes closed, trying to calm their racing hearts. And then there was May, the smallest person in the room, sitting perfectly still on her bench. Her mother knelt beside her, gently smoothing down May's black velvet dress. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" her mother asked softly. May looked up with those big brown eyes that always seemed to see more than a child should. She gave a small smile and shook her head. "I'm okay, Mama. The piano is my friend." It was a simple answer, the kind an 8-year-old would give. But anyone who had watched May play knew there was truth in those words. The piano really was her friend, maybe her best friend. May's story with music began in the most ordinary way. Her parents both taught music at a local school. Nothing fancy, just regular kids learning regular instruments. Their small apartment always had music playing. Classical, jazz, folk songs, everything. Baby May would bounce in her crib whenever she heard music, her tiny hands reaching toward the sounds. When May turned 3, her father brought home an old upright piano. It was scratched and slightly out of tune, but it was theirs. He planned to teach May some simple songs, maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or Mary Had a Little Lamb. Basic stuff that every kid learns. But May had other plans. After her father played a simple melody just once, May climbed onto the bench and played it back. Not the simplified version parents usually teach. The exact melody with the same rhythm, the same feeling. Her father thought it was luck. So he played something harder. She played it back. He played something even more complex. She played that back too. Her parents didn't know what to think. They weren't rich people who could afford fancy music schools or famous teachers. They were just ordinary folks who loved music and wanted to share that love with their daughter. But this was something different. By the time May was 5, she was playing pieces that high school students struggled with. Her small hands somehow found ways to reach keys that should have been impossible for her. She would watch videos of great pianists online, then sit at her piano and play what she had just heard. Not perfectly at first, but close enough that it made her parents' eyes water. The local community started hearing about this little girl who could play like magic. People would invite May to play at small events, church gatherings, school functions. She never said no. She loved playing for people, loved seeing their faces light up when the music filled the room. When May was 6, her parents entered her in a regional competition. They told themselves it was just for fun, just to give her experience. But May won. First place against kids twice her age. The judges couldn't believe what they were hearing. One judge, an old woman who had taught piano for 40 years, came up to May afterward with tears streaming down her face. "Child," she said, "you have a gift from heaven." That was the beginning of something bigger. More competitions followed. May won them all. Not because her parents pushed her, they never did. May loved competing, loved the challenge, loved meeting other young musicians. After each competition, she would run up to the other performers, asking them about their songs, complimenting their playing, making friends. Now at 8 years old, May was about to walk onto the biggest stage of her young life. The National Youth Music Competition wasn't some small local event. This was where the country's best young musicians came to prove themselves. The youngest competitors were usually 13 or 14. Most were 16 or 17. May, at 8, was the youngest person ever accepted into the competition. When the news got out, some people weren't happy. They said she was too young, that it wasn't fair to put such pressure on a child. Music forums online buzzed with debates. Should children this young be in such high-level competitions? Was it right? Was it healthy? But May's parents knew their daughter. They watched her carefully for any signs of stress or unhappiness. They told her 100 times that she could quit any time she wanted. That winning didn't matter. That they would love her just the same whether she played piano or never touched a key again. May would just laugh and say, "But Mama, Papa, I love playing. Why would I stop?" And she meant it. While other kids played with dolls or video games, May truly loved sitting at her piano, exploring new pieces, discovering new sounds. The competition rules were strict. Each performer had to prepare two pieces, one classical and one of their choice. May had chosen a Chopin nocturne for her classical piece. For her free choice, she picked a modern composition that was known for being technically brutal. Her teacher had worried it might be too difficult, but May insisted. She had practiced it hundreds of times in their small apartment, the notes floating through their windows and into the street below. A voice crackled over the backstage speaker. "Competitors, please take your positions. The competition will begin in 10 minutes. The buzz of nervous energy grew louder. Some teenagers looked like they might be sick. Others tried to joke around, but their laughter sounded forced. May stood up from her bench and stretched. Her mother helped her with her dress one more time. Her father, who had been quietly watching from the corner, came over and knelt down. He took both of May's small hands in his. "Remember," he said gently, "the piano is your friend. Just talk to your friend like you always do. We're proud of you no matter what happens out there." May nodded and hugged both her parents. Then she picked up her small folder containing her sheet music and walked toward the stage entrance. She looked so tiny next to all the teenagers around her. Her head barely reached most of their shoulders. An older boy, maybe 16, looked down at her with a kind smile. "First time at Nationals, kid?" May nodded. "Don't worry," he said. "The judges look scary, but they're fair. Just play your best." May thanked him shyly, but what May didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that playing her prepared pieces wouldn't be the challenge that day. Something else was waiting for her on that stage, something that would test her in ways she never imagined, something that would change everything. The stage manager called out names and competitors began filing out. May could hear the faint sound of piano music coming from the auditorium. Beautiful playing, each performer giving their very best. The bar was set incredibly high. May closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she saw her old scratched piano at home. She remembered the first time she touched those keys. The first time she realized that music could speak when words couldn't. The first time she understood that the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a voice. Her voice, May Chen, the stage manager called. "You're next." This was it. The moment had arrived. May opened her eyes, straightened her dress, and walked toward the stage with steady steps. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, she would face a challenge that would shock everyone in that auditorium. She didn't know that her life was about to change forever. All she knew was that her friend, the piano, was waiting for her on that stage, and she was ready to play. The stage lights hit May's face the moment she stepped through the curtain. For a second, she couldn't see anything, just bright white light and darkness beyond it. Then her eyes adjusted and she saw them, hundreds of people sitting in the auditorium, and right in front at a long table sat the 5 judges. May walked to the piano in the center of the stage. Each step seemed to echo in the huge room. She could feel every eye on her. The whispers had already started. She could hear them even from the stage. "Is that a child? How old is she? She looks so tiny." The piano was a beautiful grand piano, shiny and black. Nothing like her old piano at home. This one probably cost more than her family's entire apartment. May walked up to it and ran her hand gently across the smooth surface. Then she turned to face the judges and gave a small bow, just like her parents had taught her. The 5 judges looked at her with different expressions. 2 of them smiled warmly. One looked curious. One looked confused, like he couldn't understand why such a small child was on this stage. And the one in the middle, the head judge, had a face that was hard to read. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes. His name was Dr. Harrison, and he was famous in the music world. He had taught at the best music schools. He had played in concert halls across the world, and he had seen thousands of young musicians over his long career. Dr. Harrison looked at the paper in front of him, then back at May. "May Chen," he said, his voice deep and clear. It carried across the whole auditorium. Age 8, the youngest competitor in the history of this competition. Some people in the audience gasped. Others whispered louder. 8 years old. It seemed impossible. May stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting politely. She looked so small on that huge stage. Her black velvet dress made her look even tinier against the massive piano behind her. Dr. Harrison continued, "We've heard quite a bit about you, Miss Chen. They say you're exceptional. They say you're a prodigy." He paused, and something in his tone changed. It wasn't mean exactly, but it wasn't warm either. "We've seen many young talents over the years, many promising children. Some of them continue to grow. Others burn bright for a moment and then fade. The other judges shifted in their seats. One of them, a younger woman, looked uncomfortable with where this was going. But Dr. Harrison kept talking. "Before you play your prepared pieces," he said, "we'd like to do something a little different." He reached down and pulled out a folder from beside his chair. "We'd like to test your sight reading ability." May nodded. She knew what sight reading was. It meant playing a piece of music you'd never seen before, reading it as you played. Her teacher had made her practice this many times, but what happened next was not normal. Not normal at all. Dr. Harrison stood up and walked onto the stage. He was holding several sheets of music. When he placed them on the piano's music stand, even from where the other judges sat, they could see how dense the pages were, black with notes, complicated rhythms, strange time signatures. One of the other judges, a middle-aged man with glasses, leaned forward. His eyes widened. "Harrison," he said quietly, "is that the modified Rachmaninoff?" Dr. Harrison didn't answer. He just looked at May. "This is a piece we've arranged specifically for this competition," he told her. "It's quite challenging. We use it sometimes to evaluate the very advanced students." What he didn't say, what everyone in that room would learn later, was that this piece was designed to humble cocky teenagers who thought they knew everything. It was a test that even 17-year-olds with years of training would struggle with. It combined elements from one of Rachmaninoff's most difficult preludes with additional variations that the judges themselves had created. Some parts were nearly impossible to play smoothly, and Dr. Harrison was giving it to an 8-year-old. The female judge stood up quickly. "Harrison, perhaps we should let her play her prepared pieces first. She's here at a national competition," Dr. Harrison interrupted, his voice firm. "If she's truly exceptional, this should be educational for her. If not, well, then we'll know." The audience had gone completely silent. Everyone sensed something was wrong. This wasn't how competitions usually went. Parents in the crowd looked worried. Other competitors watching from backstage felt their stomachs twist. This wasn't fair. This was like asking a child to climb a mountain when they'd only practiced on hills. May looked at the sheets of music. Then she looked at Dr. Harrison. Her face was calm, but her hands had tightened into small fists at her sides. "How long do I have to look at it?" she asked quietly. 30 seconds, Dr. Harrison said. He pulled out a stopwatch from his pocket. "That should be enough time to at least look it over. 30 seconds. To read and understand a piece that would take most people several minutes just to figure out." The other judges looked at each other with concerned faces. This had gone too far, but Dr. Harrison was the head judge and he had the authority to make these decisions. "Your time starts now," he said, clicking the stopwatch. May stepped closer to the piano. She didn't sit down. She just stood there, her eyes moving across the pages of music, left to right, top to bottom. Her small fingers twitched slightly, like they were already playing the notes in her mind. In the audience, May's mother grabbed her husband's hand. Her father's jaw was clenched. They wanted to run onto that stage and take their daughter home. This wasn't what they had signed up for. This wasn't fair, but they stayed in their seats, trusting their daughter, hoping she would be okay. The seconds ticked by. 10, 15, 20. May's eyes never stopped moving. She was reading the music the way other people read books, absorbing every note, every symbol, every instruction on those pages, 25, 28, 30. "Time," Dr. Harrison said, clicking the stopwatch again. May looked up at him. Her eyes were different now. Still calm, but there was something else there. Something determined. Something that said she understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't just a test of her sight reading. This was a test to see if she would break, to see if she would cry or run off stage or admit that she wasn't ready for this level of competition. But May didn't cry. She didn't run. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone. She smiled. Just a small smile, but it was there. "Can I play it now?" she asked. Dr. Harrison nodded, though he looked slightly taken aback by her composure. "Please," he said, gesturing to the piano bench. May climbed onto the bench. She adjusted her position, making sure she could reach the pedals with her feet even though it was a stretch. She placed her hands over the keys. The auditorium was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. Backstage, the other competitors had all stopped what they were doing. They crowded around the stage entrance, peeking out to watch. Word had spread quickly about what was happening. The little 8-year-old was being given the impossible test. the test that even they feared. One of the teenage girls felt tears in her eyes. "That's not right," she whispered to the boy next to her. "She's just a baby. Why would they do that to her?" The boy shook his head. "Dr. Harrison has always been tough. But this is something else." On stage, May closed her eyes for just a moment. She took one deep breath. In her mind, she could see her parents in the audience. She could feel their love wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She thought about her old piano at home, the one with the scratched surface and the slightly out-of-tune keys. The piano that had been her friend since she was 3 years old. And then she opened her eyes. Her fingers positioned themselves over the keys. The opening notes of the piece were supposed to be a cascade, a waterfall of sound that was technically brutal. Most pianists would need to start slowly, carefully finding each note. But May didn't start slowly. Her hands began to move, and what happened next would become the moment that everyone in that auditorium would remember for the rest of their lives. The moment that would change everything. The moment that would prove that sometimes genius really does exist in the most unexpected places. Dr. Harrison stood beside the piano, his stopwatch still in his hand. He expected to hear hesitation, mistakes, the sound of a child trying her best but falling short. That's what he had heard from every other young musician he'd given this test to. But that's not what he heard. Not at all. What he heard, what they all heard, was something that shouldn't have been possible. And it started in the first 3 seconds. The first 3 seconds changed everything. May's fingers moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own. The opening cascade that was supposed to be impossibly difficult just flowed from her hands. Not slowly, not carefully, fast and precise and absolutely perfect. Dr. Harrison's mouth fell open. The stopwatch in his hand nearly dropped to the floor. The opening passage of the modified Rachmaninoff was designed to be the hardest part. It was a test within a test. Most pianists, even professional ones, would need several tries to get it right. They would stumble over the rapid note changes. They would miss the complex rhythms. They would play some notes too loud and others too soft. But May didn't stumble. She didn't miss a single note. In 3 seconds, she had played through what should have taken a trained adult several minutes just to learn. And she hadn't just played the notes correctly. She had played them with feeling, with understanding, with a musicality that seemed impossible for someone her age. The female judge jumped to her feet. Her hand was over her mouth. The man with glasses grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The other 2 judges sat frozen, unable to believe what they were hearing. But May wasn't done. Not even close. Those first 3 seconds were just the beginning. She continued playing, moving deeper into the piece. Her small hands stretched across keys that should have been out of reach. She used the pedals with perfect timing, creating layers of sound that filled the entire auditorium. The modified variations that the judges had created to be tricky and confusing seemed to make perfect sense when May played them. From the audience, her mother started crying. Not sad tears, happy tears, overwhelmed tears. Her father sat with his hands pressed together, watching his little girl do something that he knew was special. Something that might only happen once in a lifetime. The other competitors backstage were pushing each other, trying to get a better view. Some of them had their phones out, recording. Others just stood with their mouths hanging open. The teenage girl who had called May a baby earlier now had tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God," she kept whispering. "Oh my God." On stage, Dr. Harrison slowly walked backward until he reached his chair. He sat down heavily. His face had gone pale. The other judges were writing frantically on their score sheets, but they kept stopping to just listen. Because how do you score something like this? How do you judge perfection? May played on. The piece was long, much longer than a typical sight reading test. It went through multiple movements, each one harder than the last. There were parts where both hands had to play completely different rhythms at the same time. Parts where the tempo changed suddenly. Parts where the notes jumped all over the keyboard. May handled all of it. She made it look easy. But more than that, she made it beautiful. This wasn't just a technical display. This was music. Real music. The kind that makes your heart hurt in a good way. The kind that makes you forget where you are and just feel. About 2 minutes into the piece, something remarkable happened. May started adding her own touches. Little things. A slight change in dynamics here. A brief pause there. Nothing that broke the rules or changed the composer's intent. Just small, subtle choices that showed she wasn't just reading notes on a page. She was interpreting them, understanding them, making them her own. Dr. Harrison noticed. Of course he noticed. He had been teaching music for over 40 years. He had studied at the finest conservatories. He had played with orchestras around the world. And in all that time he had never seen anything like this. Not from adults. Certainly not from a child. The piece built toward its climax. The final section was intentionally brutal. The judges had put in a section that required incredible hand, speed, perfect timing, and the ability to play thunderously loud and whisper quiet within seconds of each other. It was the kind of passage that was meant to show young musicians what they still needed to learn. May approached it without fear. Her hands became a blur. The piano sang and roared and whispered under her fingers. Some notes came out so soft they were almost not there. Others filled the room like thunder. And through it all, May sat perfectly calm, her small body swaying slightly with the music. Then came the final chord. A massive, complex chord that required both hands to stretch across multiple octaves. May's hands came down on the keys with perfect confidence. The sound rang out through the auditorium, beautiful and powerful and final, and then silence. Complete silence. May sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys. She was breathing a little harder now. That had been 4 minutes of intense playing, 4 minutes of pouring everything she had into this music. She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. Then she looked up at Dr. Harrison. The old man was staring at her. His eyes were wet. Actual tears were forming in the eyes of this stern, serious judge who had seen everything in his long career. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what to say. What had just happened seemed too big for words. Then someone in the audience started clapping. Just one person. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on their feet. The applause was deafening. People were cheering. Some were crying. Others were hugging the strangers sitting next to them. The other 4 judges stood up, applauding hard. The woman judge had tears running down her face. The man with glasses was shaking his head in disbelief, a huge smile on his face. Even the 2 judges who had seemed uncertain before were clapping with genuine amazement. But Dr. Harrison wasn't clapping. Not yet. He stood up slowly from his chair. He looked at the score sheets in front of him. He looked at his fellow judges. Then he looked at May, still sitting quietly at the piano, looking small and uncertain now that the music had stopped. Dr. Harrison walked onto the stage. The applause began to die down as people watched to see what would happen. The famous judge, the tough critic, the man who had given this impossible test to an 8-year-old child. What would he say now? He walked right up to the piano, right up to where May sat. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked at her. This tiny child who had just done something that shouldn't have been possible. Then Dr. Harrison did something he had never done in all his years of judging. He got down on one knee. He lowered himself so he was at eye level with May. And when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Miss Chen," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "May, I need to tell you something. I need to tell everyone here something." The auditorium was dead quiet now. Everyone was leaning forward to hear. "I have been teaching and judging music for over 40 years. Dr. Harrison continued. I have heard thousands of performances. I have taught hundreds of students. Some of them went on to become famous musicians. Some of them play in the greatest concert halls in the world." He paused, and a tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "But in all those years, in all those performances, I have never witnessed anything like what I just heard. What you just did was not just technically perfect. It was beyond perfect. You didn't just play that piece. You understood it. You felt it. You made it yours. And you did it with music you had never seen before after looking at it for 30 seconds. May's eyes were wide. She didn't know what to say. Dr. Harrison wasn't finished. "I gave you that test to humble you. he admitted, his voice getting stronger now, to show you that you still had much to learn, that being young and talented wasn't enough. He shook his head. I was wrong. So very wrong. You didn't just pass my test. You taught me something that I had forgotten. You reminded me why we make music in the first place. Not to show off, not to prove we're better than others, but to share something beautiful with the world. He reached out and gently took one of May's small hands in both of his larger ones. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for reminding this old man what genius really looks like. The auditorium erupted again. The applause was even louder than before. People were standing on their chairs. Some were whistling. Others were just crying openly. May looked out at the crowd. She found her parents in the third row. Her mother was sobbing into her father's shoulder. Her father was crying too, but he was smiling at the same time. He gave May a thumbs up. May looked back at Dr. Harrison, and then she did something that no one expected. She smiled at him, a warm, forgiving smile. And she said 6 words that would become almost as famous as her performance. It's okay. Music is for everyone. Dr. Harrison let out a laugh that was half sob. He stood up and helped May down from the piano bench. Then he started clapping. All 5 judges were clapping now. The whole auditorium was clapping. The noise was like a wave, washing over everything. May took a small bow. Then, because she was still just an 8-year-old kid, she ran off stage to find her parents. Behind her, the applause continued for a full 3 minutes. People didn't want it to stop. They wanted to hold on to this moment, this perfect, incredible moment. May ran straight into her mother's arms. Her father wrapped both of them in a tight hug. For a moment, they just stood there in the aisle while people around them continued clapping and taking pictures. Her mother was saying something, but May couldn't hear the words over all the noise. She could just feel her mother's tears on her cheek and her father's strong arms around them both. Can we go home now? May asked when the noise finally started to die down. I'm hungry. Her parents laughed. Of course she was hungry. She was 8 years old, and it was past lunchtime. Even after doing something that would be talked about for years to come, May was still just a kid who wanted lunch. But going home wasn't going to be that simple. Not anymore. The competition continued, but everyone knew the outcome already. The other performers did their best, and many of them were genuinely talented. But after what they had witnessed after May's performance, everything else felt like an echo. The teenage boy who had been kind to May backstage played beautifully. When he finished, he bowed and said into the microphone, I'd like to dedicate that performance to the little girl who just showed us all what real music looks like. The audience loved him for that. When all the performances were done, the judges didn't even need to deliberate. They came back in less than 5 minutes. Dr. Harrison stood at the microphone, and this time his voice was steady and sure. In a unanimous decision, first place goes to May Chen. He paused as the crowd erupted again. But more than that, I want to say something to everyone here. Today we witnessed something rare, something precious. We saw pure talent meeting pure heart. We saw a child remind us all why we love music. The score Miss Chen received is the highest score in the 50-year history of this competition, and it is well deserved. May walked back onto the stage to receive her trophy. It was almost as big as she was. The other judges came up one by one to shake her hand. The female judge bent down and whispered, Never stop playing, sweetheart. The world needs your music. But after the ceremony ended, that's when things got really complicated. A crowd formed around May and her parents. Reporters with cameras and microphones pushed forward. Famous music teachers from prestigious schools handed her parents business cards. There was even a man in an expensive suit who said he was a talent agent and wanted to talk about opportunities. May's father held up his hands. Please, he said firmly. She's just a child. She needs space. He picked May up and carried her through the crowd while her mother walked close beside them, creating a protective barrier. They made it to their car, and for a moment, sitting in the quiet vehicle, they could finally breathe. May was in the back seat, the huge trophy buckled in beside her. She looked tired now. The adrenaline was wearing off. "Mama?" she said quietly. "Did I do good?" Her mother turned around, fresh tears in her eyes. "Baby, you were perfect. But you know what made us most proud? Not how you played. How you handled yourself. How you stayed kind and calm. Even when that judge was being unfair. That's what made us really proud." May smiled and closed her eyes. By the time they got home, she was fast asleep. But the world was just waking up to May Chen. Someone in the audience had recorded her performance on their phone. By that evening, the video was online. By the next morning, it had been viewed 100,000 times. By the end of the week, millions of people around the world had watched the 8-year-old girl play the impossible piece. The comments were overwhelming. Professional musicians analyzed every second of her performance. Music professors used it as teaching material. People who knew nothing about classical music watched it and felt something they couldn't quite explain. The video of Dr. Harrison kneeling beside her and apologizing became almost as famous as the performance itself. Major newspapers wanted interviews. Television shows called. A famous late-night host joked that his show's piano player should be worried about being replaced by an 8-year-old. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. May's parents had to make some hard decisions. Their phone rang constantly. People showed up at their door. Other parents from May's school started treating them differently, either overly friendly or strangely distant. May's school principal called and suggested that maybe May needed a special educational path now. One evening, about a week after the competition, the family sat together at their small kitchen table. The old piano stood in the corner, the same scratched piano where May had learned to play. The trophy from the competition sat on top of it, looking out of place in their modest apartment. "We need to talk about what happens next," May's father said gently. "A lot of people want a lot of things from you, May, but we need to know what you want." May thought about it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to keep playing piano. I want to keep going to school with my friends. I want to still be me." Her parents looked at each other. That simple answer told them everything they needed to know. "Then that's what we'll do," her mother said firmly. "We'll protect that. We'll protect you being you." They made rules. May would continue her regular schooling. She would have time to play with friends. She would not be pushed into performances she didn't want to do. Any opportunities would be evaluated based on whether they were good for May, not whether they were impressive or profitable. Some of the fancy music schools were disappointed when May's parents turned them down. The talent agent stopped calling after they politely but firmly said no. But Dr. Harrison reached out with a different kind of offer. He wanted to mentor May, not at some prestigious school, not in some formal pressure-filled program. He offered to come to their city once a month and work with May, to guide her, to teach her, but also to protect her. He had learned something from their encounter. He had learned that nurturing talent meant more than just pushing for perfection. "I made a mistake with you," he wrote in his letter to May's parents. "I tried to test you instead of trust you. I don't want to make that mistake again. If you'll let me, I'd like to help May grow as a musician. But more importantly, I want to help make sure she gets to stay a child. She taught me something important. Now I'd like to give something back." May's parents agreed. Once a month, Dr. Harrison would take the train to their city. He would spend a Saturday afternoon with May, working on technique, exploring new pieces, discussing music theory. But he would also bring cookies. He would ask about her friends at school. He would remind her that being an extraordinary musician didn't mean she had to stop being an ordinary kid. Meanwhile, the invitations kept coming. A famous concert hall wanted May to perform. A documentary crew wanted to follow her around. A publisher wanted to write a book about her. May's parents said no to most of them. But they said yes to one thing. A children's hospital asked if May would come play for the kids who were sick. No cameras. No reporters. Just May and her piano and children who needed something beautiful in their lives. May was excited about that. "Yes," she said immediately. "I want to do that." So on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, May and her parents went to the hospital. They set up a keyboard in the common room, and children in wheelchairs and hospital gowns gathered around. Some were bald from chemotherapy. Others had casts or bandages. All of them looked tired and a little scared. May played for an hour. She played everything from classical pieces to movie themes to silly songs that made the kids laugh. Between songs, she talked to them, asked their names, complimented a kid's cool wheelchair stickers, made a little girl with no hair laugh by joking that they should both wear funny hats. There were no judges there. No competition. No pressure. Just music and joy and sick children forgetting for a moment that they were sick. The nurses and doctors stood in the doorway, many of them crying quietly. When it was time to leave, a small boy in a wheelchair rolled up to May. He looked about 6 years old. "Will you come back?" he asked shyly. May knelt down so she was at his level. "Of course," she said. "Would you like that?" He nodded hard. "Your music made my stomach stop hurting." That moment, more than the trophy or the viral video or anything else, made May understand something important. The piano wasn't just her friend. Music wasn't just something she was good at. It was something she could share. Something she could give to others. Something that could make people feel better. On the drive home, May was quiet. Her parents asked if she was okay. She nodded. "I think I know now," she said. "Know what, sweetheart?" Her mother asked. "Why I can play like I can. It's not just for me. It's not just for competitions. It's to help people feel things. Good things, even when they're sad or hurt or scared." Her father's eyes got wet. He reached back and squeezed her hand. "That's exactly right, baby. That's exactly right." That night back home, May sat at her old scratched piano. She didn't play anything fancy. She didn't play anything difficult. She just played a simple melody. Something gentle and peaceful. Something that sounded like hope. Outside her window, the sun was setting. The trophy sat on top of the piano, catching the orange light. But May wasn't looking at the trophy. She was looking at the keys at her hands, at the instrument that had been her friend for 5 years, and she smiled. Because she understood now, the competition had changed things. The video had made her famous. But none of that mattered as much as knowing what her gift was really for. It wasn't about being the best. It was about sharing something beautiful with a world that needed all the beauty it could get. 1 year later, May turned 9 years old. A lot had changed. But in the ways that mattered most, everything had stayed the same. She still lived in the same apartment with her parents. She still went to the same school. She still played on the same old scratched piano that had been her first teacher. But the world around her had shifted in ways both big and small. The video of her performance had been watched over 20 million times. Music students around the world studied it in their classes. Her name had become known in classical music circles everywhere. But May's parents had kept their promise. They protected her childhood fiercely. May still had playdates with her school friends. She still did homework at the kitchen table. She still complained about having to eat her vegetables and begged to stay up late on weekends. She went to birthday parties and played tag at recess and had a favorite cartoon that she watched every Saturday morning. But she also practiced piano 4 hours a day now, not because anyone forced her. She wanted to. Dr. Harrison came every month like clockwork, and under his guidance, May's playing had grown even more remarkable. He taught her not just technique, but the history behind the music. The emotions the composers were feeling when they wrote each piece, the stories hidden in every note. "Music is a language," Dr. Harrison told her during one lesson. "You already speak it fluently. Now I'm teaching you the poetry." And May understood. She always understood. That was her gift. Not just the ability to play notes, but the ability to understand what those notes meant, to feel what they were trying to say. The hospital visits had become regular. Once a month, May would go play for the sick children. She never accepted payment. She never brought cameras. It was just her and her music and kids who needed something to smile about. The hospital staff said that on the days May came, everything felt lighter. Even the saddest cases seemed to have a little more hope. One day, a little girl named Sophie, who had been fighting cancer for 2 years, asked May a question. "Does it ever get hard? Playing the piano?" May thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes my hands get tired. Or a piece is really tricky and I can't get it right. But then I remember why I play. And that makes it easier," Sophie smiled. She was 7 years old and had lost all her hair to chemotherapy. But when May played for her, Sophie closed her eyes and forgot about being sick. She just listened and felt peaceful. 3 months later, Sophie passed away. May cried when she heard the news. She cried hard, the way only a 9-year-old can cry when they lose a friend. Her parents held her and let her be sad. They didn't try to fix it or make it better with words. They just let her feel. At Sophie's funeral, her parents asked if May would play. May wasn't sure she could. Her hands shook when she thought about it. But her mother squeezed her shoulder and said, "You gave Sophie joy when she was alive. You can give her family comfort now." So May played at the funeral. She played Sophie's favorite piece, a gentle lullaby that she had requested many times at the hospital. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the service, Sophie's mother hugged May tight and whispered, "Thank you for being her friend. Thank you for making her last months beautiful." That experience changed something in May. She understood now that music could carry people through the hardest moments of their lives. It wasn't just entertainment. It wasn't just art, it was something deeper, something necessary. The big invitation came when May was 9.5. Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. They wanted May to perform as part of their youth series. It would be the youngest solo performance in the hall's history. May's parents almost said no. It seemed too big, too much pressure. But Dr. Harrison sat with them for hours talking it through. "She's ready," he said. "Not just technically, emotionally. She understands what she's doing now. This isn't about showing off. This is about sharing her gift with more people." They asked May what she wanted. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to do it. But I want to dedicate the performance to Sophie. And I want to donate all the money to the Children's Hospital." Her parents looked at each other with pride and sadness and love all mixed together. Their little girl was growing up. Not in the way that meant she was losing her childhood. In the way that meant she was becoming who she was meant to be. The night of the Carnegie Hall performance arrived. May was 9 years old, wearing a simple white dress that her mother had made. No fancy designer clothes. No expensive jewelry. Just May, looking like the child she was. Backstage, she wasn't nervous. She had learned something over the past year. When you play for the right reasons, the nerves don't take over. When you play to share something beautiful rather than to prove something, the pressure fades away. Dr. Harrison found her before she went on. He was in his best suit, looking proud. "Are you ready?" he asked. May nodded. "I'm going to play for Sophie tonight. And for all the kids at the hospital. And for anyone in that audience who needs to hear something beautiful." Dr. Harrison's eyes got wet. Even after a year of working with May, she still surprised him with her wisdom. "That's perfect," he said. "That's exactly right." When the announcer introduced her, he told the audience about May's journey, about the viral video, about her hospital visits, about Sophie, about how this 9-year-old had chosen to use her extraordinary gift to help others. The audience gave her a standing ovation before she even played a single note. May walked onto the famous Carnegie Hall stage. She looked so small under those lights. The piano seemed enormous compared to her tiny frame. But when she sat down and her hands touched the keys, something magical happened, just like it always did. She played for 90 minutes. A full concert, pieces from Mozart and Chopin and Rachmaninoff, modern compositions, classical masterworks, and in the middle of it all she played Sophie's lullaby. She told the audience about her friend who had loved music, who had closed her eyes and smiled when May played for her in the hospital. "This one is for Sophie," May said into the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "She taught me that music can be medicine, that it can make people feel better even when they're really sick. She's not here anymore, but I think she can hear this. Wherever she is." The lullaby was simple, not technically difficult, but May played it with so much love, so much genuine emotion, that people in the audience were sobbing openly. It was the most beautiful 4 minutes of music that Historic Hall had ever heard, not because of technical perfection, because of pure heart. When the concert ended, the standing ovation lasted for 10 minutes. People were throwing flowers onto the stage. Critics who had reviewed thousands of performances were wiping tears from their eyes. The president of Carnegie Hall came on stage and said, "In all my years here, I have never witnessed anything quite like this. Miss Machen, you are truly special." But May just smiled and bowed and thought about Sophie. She thought about all the kids at the hospital. She thought about everyone in the audience who might have been carrying something heavy in their hearts. And she was glad she could give them this moment of beauty, this reminder that good things still existed in the world. After the performance, May did interviews with major news channels. They all asked the same questions. How did she play so well? What was her secret? Was she going to become the greatest pianist in the world? May's answers were simple and honest. "I just love music. It's my friend. And I want to share my friend with everyone. When asked about her future, she said, "I want to keep playing. But I also want to keep being a kid. I want to have friends and go to school and eat ice cream and play games. The piano is important, but it's not everything." The reporters loved her for that. She wasn't a robot trained to be perfect. She was a real child with a real gift who understood something important. Talent without humanity is just noise. Dr. Harrison was interviewed too. They asked him about that day at the competition, about the test he had given May, whether he regretted it. "I regret my motivation," he said honestly. "I gave her that test for the wrong reasons. But I don't regret that it happened, because it taught me something crucial. It taught me that genius doesn't just mean technical skill. May's real genius is her heart, the way she approaches music with love and generosity, the way she uses her gift to help others. That's what makes her truly extraordinary." The video of his words went viral too. Music schools around the world started rethinking how they taught students. It wasn't just about practicing scales and hitting the right notes anymore. It was about understanding why music mattered, about connecting with the human heart behind the performance. May's Carnegie Hall performance raised over $200,000 for the Children's Hospital. They used it to create a music therapy program. They bought instruments for kids to play. They hired musicians to perform for patients regularly. They called it Sophie's Music Room in honor of the little girl who had loved May's playing so much. On the day the music room opened, May was there. She played the first notes in that new space. All around her, sick children sat with instruments of their own, ready to learn, ready to discover that they could make beautiful sounds too. That music belonged to everyone, not just the talented few. May looked around at all those children and smiled. This was better than any competition, better than any trophy, better than fame or recognition or Carnegie Hall. This was what her gift was for: to create more music, to create more joy, to show others that they had beauty inside them too. As May played that day, surrounded by children discovering music for the first time, she thought about her journey. From a 3-year-old touching piano keys in her small apartment to a 9-year-old performing at Carnegie Hall. From a nervous competitor to a child who understood her purpose, and the old scratched piano at home was still her favorite. The simple apartment was still where she felt most comfortable. Her parents were still her biggest supporters. Dr. Harrison had become like a grandfather to her, proud and protective and wise, but most importantly, May was still May, still a child who loved music, still a kid who played with friends and did homework and sometimes didn't want to practice, still someone who saw the piano not as a tool for fame, but as a friend who helped her share love with the world. And that, more than all the performances and all the applause and all the recognition, was what made her story truly beautiful. She had been given an extraordinary gift, and she had chosen to use it in the most extraordinary way possible. Not to lift herself up, but to lift others. Not to prove she was special, but to help others feel special too. That's the real story of May Chen. Not just a genius pianist, a genius human being,